The day was gray and cold, with a biting wind that cut through the thin fabric of Thomas Harrington's coat. He stood in the cemetery, his hands shoved deep into his pockets as he stared at the headstone before him. The inscription read, "Ethan Harrington, beloved son." It had been 5 years since Ethan's death, but the pain still felt fresh, like an open wound that refused to heal. Every year on this date, Thomas came here alone, bringing flowers and memories of the boy who had once filled his life with laughter. Thomas knelt down slowly, placing the bouquet of white lilies carefully on the grave. His movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if performing this act could somehow bridge the gap between the living and the dead. But today, something was different. As he straightened up, his sharp eyes caught movement out of the corner of his vision, a flicker of color against the dull backdrop of weathered tombstones. Turning slightly, he saw a small figure sitting cross-legged near another grave a few rows away. At first glance, the boy looked ordinary enough, though there was something unsettling about the way he seemed so completely at ease in such a somber place. He couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, dressed in oversized clothes that hung loosely on his slight frame. A worn teddy bear rested in his lap, its fur matted and faded from years of use. The boy didn't notice Thomas watching him. Instead, he traced patterns in the dirt with one finger, humming softly under his breath. Curiosity tugged at Thomas, pulling him closer despite himself. Over the years, he had grown used to solitude, preferring the company of ghosts to people. Yet now, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, he felt drawn to this child. Slowly he approached, stopping a few feet away. "Hello?" he said, his voice low and gravelly from disuse. The boy startled, looking up quickly. His wide eyes locked onto Thomas, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, hesitantly, the boy replied, "Hi." "What are you doing here?" Thomas asked, glancing around the empty cemetery. There were no other visitors nearby, just rows upon rows of silent graves stretching out beneath the overcast sky. "I come here sometimes," the boy said simply, clutching the teddy bear tighter to his chest. "It's quiet." Thomas frowned, studying the boy more closely. His clothes were too big, clearly hand-me-downs or worse, and his face was smudged with dirt. Despite the grime, though, there was an innocence in his expression that reminded Thomas painfully of Ethan. The resemblance wasn't exact, but it was enough to make his heart ache. "Do your parents know you're here?" Thomas asked cautiously. The boy hesitated, then shook his head. "They don't care." Something about the way he said it sent a chill down Thomas's spine. He crouched down to be at eye level with the boy, softening his tone. "What's your name?" "Leo," the boy murmured, looking down at his feet. "Well, Leo," Thomas began, "why do you come here? Don't you have somewhere else to go?" Leo shrugged, avoiding Thomas's gaze. "Not really. My mom left me with my uncle when I was 6, and he didn't want me anymore, so I've been staying wherever I can." Thomas's stomach tightened. He wanted to ask more questions, to press for details, but the sadness in Leo's voice stopped him. Instead, he gestured toward the grave beside them. "Whose grave is this?" "It's not anyone's," Leo admitted quietly. "I just sit here because it feels safe, like nobody will bother me." For a long time, Thomas didn't say anything. He simply watched Leo, his mind racing. This boy, this fragile, lonely little boy, had found refuge in a place meant for mourning. And yet, there was something about him that felt familiar, as if fate itself had led him here today. Finally, Thomas cleared his throat. "Would you like to come home with me, Leo?" The boy blinked in surprise, clearly unsure whether he'd heard correctly. "Why would you want me to come with you?" Thomas hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because I think we both need someone right now. Maybe we can help each other." Leo stared at him for what felt like an eternity, weighing his options. Then slowly he nodded. "Okay." As they walked back to Thomas's car together, the billionaire couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter was more than mere coincidence. Something about Leo, the way he carried himself, the way he spoke, reminded Thomas so strongly of Ethan that it was almost uncanny. Perhaps, he thought, taking this boy under his wing wouldn't just be an act of kindness. Perhaps it would be a way to keep a piece of Ethan alive, even if only in spirit. Little did Thomas know bringing Leo into his life would set off a chain of events that would test everything he believed in and ultimately lead to discoveries beyond his wildest imagination. The drive back to Thomas Harrington's estate was quiet, save for the rhythmic hum of the car engine and the occasional rustle of leaves as the wind swept past. Leo sat in the passenger seat, clutching his teddy bear tightly, his wide eyes darting around the luxurious interior of the car. Everything about it, the leather seats, the polished wood accents, the faint scent of expensive cologne, was foreign to him. He had spent most of his life on the streets or in cramped, dingy corners of abandoned buildings. This world of wealth and comfort felt like something out of a dream, one he half expected to wake up from at any moment. Thomas glanced at the boy occasionally, noting the way his small fingers dug into the worn fabric of the teddy bear. There was a fragility to Leo that made Thomas's chest tighten. It wasn't just his physical appearance, his thin frame, the dirt smudged across his cheeks, but the way he carried himself, as though bracing for rejection or punishment. The billionaire knew all too well how fear could shape a person, how it could harden their edges or leave them perpetually on guard. For a brief moment he wondered if taking the boy home had been a mistake. But then Leo turned to look at him, his expression softening slightly, and Thomas pushed the doubt aside. Whatever happened next, he couldn't turn back now. When they arrived at the mansion, Leo froze on the doorstep, staring up at the towering structure with awe. The house was a sprawling estate surrounded by lush gardens and tall iron gates, its grandeur almost overwhelming. "Is this really where you live?" Leo asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Thomas replied simply, opening the door. "Come inside." The interior was even more impressive than the exterior, with high ceilings, marble floors, and crystal chandeliers casting warm light throughout the space. Leo hesitated before stepping in, his shoes leaving faint traces of dirt on the pristine floor. He flinched, expecting Thomas to scold him, but the older man merely smiled faintly and gestured for him to follow. "This is your room," Thomas said a few minutes later, leading Leo to a spacious guest bedroom on the second floor. The walls were painted a soft blue, and the bed was adorned with fresh linens and plush pillows. A desk sat near the window, overlooking the garden below, and a small bookshelf stood against one wall, already stocked with children's books and puzzles. Leo's mouth fell open. "This is mine, for now," Thomas confirmed. "We'll get you some new clothes tomorrow and anything else you need. You're safe here, Leo. No one will hurt you." For the first time since meeting him, Leo's face broke into a tentative smile. "Thank you," he murmured, clutching his teddy bear even tighter. Over the next few days, Thomas began to notice subtle changes in the boy. At first, Leo was wary, flinching at sudden movements and retreating into himself whenever anyone approached. But as the staff, housekeepers, cooks, and gardeners went about their duties, Leo started to relax. He would sit quietly in the kitchen, while meals were prepared, watching with fascination as the cook whipped up dishes far more elaborate than anything he'd ever eaten. Sometimes, he'd help set the table, his movements clumsy but earnest. One evening, Thomas found Leo in the library, perched on the edge of a chair with a book open in his lap. The boy looked up guiltily when he noticed Thomas standing in the doorway. "I didn't mean to touch anything," Leo stammered. "I just wanted to see." "You can read?" Thomas asked, surprised. Leo nodded shyly. "My mom taught me before she left. I used to read stories to her sometimes." Thomas felt a pang of sadness at the mention of Leo's mother, but he didn't press further. Instead, he pulled up a chair and sat beside the boy. "What are you reading?" "It's about knights and castles," Leo explained, holding up the book. "They fight dragons and rescue people." "Sounds exciting," Thomas said, smiling faintly. "Do you want me to read it with you?" Leo's eyes lit up. "Really?" And so they spent the evening together, flipping through the pages and sharing the story. It was a small moment, but it marked the beginning of something profound. Slowly but surely, Leo began to trust Thomas, and Thomas found himself looking forward to these quiet interactions. They reminded him of the times he'd spent with Ethan, reading bedtime stories or building model airplanes. The resemblance between the two boys was uncanny, not just in appearance but in the way they both seemed to carry a spark of hope even in the darkest moments. However, not everyone shared Thomas's enthusiasm about the arrangement. Richard Langley, his longtime business partner, wasted no time voicing his concerns. "Are you sure this is wise, Thomas?" Richard asked during one of their weekly meetings. "Taking in a random kid off the street? What do you even know about him?" "I know he needed help," Thomas replied firmly. "Isn't that enough?" Richard sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's not that simple. People will talk. They'll say you're using him for publicity, or worse, exploiting him for tax breaks. And what about legal issues? If social services find out—" "I've already spoken to a lawyer," Thomas interrupted. "We're going to start the adoption process. Leo deserves a stable home, and I can provide that." Richard shook his head, clearly unconvinced. "You're playing with fire, my friend. Be careful." Despite Richard's warnings, Thomas pressed on. He hired a private investigator to dig into Leo's background, confirming what the boy had told him. His mother had abandoned him, and his uncle, a known alcoholic and petty criminal, had kicked him out after months of neglect and abuse. Armed with this information, Thomas worked tirelessly to ensure Leo's transition into his care was smooth and legitimate. But the challenges didn't end there. Word of Thomas's unexpected act of kindness spread quickly, reaching the ears of social workers and child welfare agencies. One afternoon, 2 representatives arrived unannounced at the estate, requesting to speak with both Thomas and Leo. "We need to assess whether this environment is suitable for the child," one of them explained, her tone polite but firm. Thomas nodded, masking his anxiety behind a calm exterior. "Of course. Leo is adjusting well, and we're doing everything we can to make him feel at home." Leo, sitting quietly beside Thomas, answered their questions with surprising poise. When asked about his feelings toward living with Thomas, he replied honestly, "He saved me. I was scared before, but now I'm not. I like it here." The sincerity in his voice seemed to disarm the social workers, and after a thorough inspection of the property, they agreed to allow Leo to stay, for now. However, they warned Thomas that the adoption process would be lengthy and rigorous, requiring multiple evaluations and home visits. As weeks turned into months, Thomas and Leo grew closer, forming a bond that neither of them had anticipated. Yet beneath the surface, shadows lingered. Leo still struggled with nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat and trembling. He refused to talk about them, brushing off Thomas's concerned inquiries with a mumbled, "It's nothing." But Thomas wasn't fooled. Something was troubling the boy, something deeper than mere trauma from his past. And as strange occurrences began to unfold within the mansion, doors creaking open on their own, lights flickering without explanation, he couldn't shake the feeling that the answers lay just beyond the veil of reality. Whatever secrets Leo held, they were bound to come to light sooner or later. And when they did, Thomas knew their lives would change forever. As the weeks turned into months, life at Thomas Harrington's estate settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and unsettling. Leo had begun to thrive in his new surroundings. His once timid demeanor gave way to moments of genuine joy. He laughed more often, explored every corner of the mansion with childlike curiosity, and even started calling Thomas Dad when he thought no one was listening. But despite these outward signs of progress, there were nights when the boy woke up screaming, clutching his teddy bear as though it might protect him from whatever haunted his dreams. At first, Thomas dismissed the strange happenings around the house as coincidence or stress-induced imagination. After all, old mansions like this one creaked and groaned naturally, especially on windy nights. But as the incidents grew more frequent and more peculiar, he found it harder to ignore them. Lights would flicker without warning, even though The wiring had been inspected and deemed flawless. Doors that were firmly closed would swing open by themselves, revealing empty rooms behind them. And then there were the whispers, soft, indistinct murmurs that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Leo didn't talk about these occurrences, but Thomas noticed how the boy would pause mid-step in the hallway, tilting his head slightly as if listening to something only he could hear. One evening, while they sat together in the living room reading, Thomas finally decided to confront the issue. "Leo," he began cautiously, setting his book aside. "Have you noticed anything unusual lately?" The boy hesitated, his fingers tracing the edge of the page. Then after a long silence, he nodded slowly. "Sometimes I hear things," he admitted in a whisper. "Like someone talking, but I can't understand what they're saying." Thomas leaned forward, his brow furrowing. "Do you think it's coming from inside the house?" Leo shook his head. "I don't know. It feels closer, though. Like it's right next to me." A chill ran down Thomas's spine. He wanted to reassure the boy, to tell him it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was trying to communicate. The question was, who? One night, unable to sleep, Thomas wandered downstairs for a glass of water. As he passed through the dimly lit hallway, he heard faint footsteps echoing ahead of him. At first, he assumed it was one of the staff making late-night rounds, but when he reached the source of the sound, the corridor was empty. Frowning, he continued toward the kitchen, only to stop dead in his tracks when he saw a shadow move across the wall. There was no one there to cast it. His heart pounding, Thomas returned to bed, dismissing the incident as fatigue catching up with him. But the next morning, over breakfast, Leo surprised him by blurting out, "I saw him again last night." "Saw who?" Thomas asked, his voice tight with unease. "The boy," Leo replied matter-of-factly, as though discussing an everyday occurrence. "He looks like me, but older. He smiles sometimes and then he disappears." Thomas stared at the boy, his mind racing. "What do you mean he looks like you? Can you describe him?" Leo nodded. "He has brown hair like mine, and a scar above his eyebrow. He doesn't say anything, but I feel like he wants me to follow him." The description sent a jolt of recognition through Thomas. Ethan had a small scar above his left eyebrow, a souvenir from falling off his bike when he was 7. Could it be possible? Was Leo seeing glimpses of Ethan's spirit lingering in the house? Or was this some trick of the mind, a manifestation of grief and guilt? Desperate for answers, Thomas arranged for a psychologist specializing in childhood trauma to visit the estate. Dr. Emily Carter arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon, her demeanor calm and professional. After spending several hours speaking with Leo, she suggested hypnotherapy as a way to explore the root of his visions. "I'm not promising miracles," Dr. Carter warned Thomas beforehand. "But sometimes, accessing the subconscious can help uncover buried memories or emotions." Thomas agreed, hoping the session might provide clarity, not just for Leo but for himself as well. The hypnosis took place in the study, where soft lighting and soothing music created a tranquil atmosphere. Leo lay on a reclining chair, his breathing slow and steady as Dr. Carter guided him into a state of deep relaxation. Thomas watched anxiously from the corner, torn between hope and dread. "Leo," Dr. Carter said gently, "can you tell me what you see?" For a moment the boy remained silent, his face serene. Then in a voice so quiet it was almost inaudible, he began to speak. "I'm in a park. There's a boy climbing a tree. He's laughing. He tells me his name is Ethan." Thomas's breath caught in his throat. He gripped the armrest of his chair, leaning forward as if afraid to miss a single word. "What does Ethan look like?" Dr. Carter prompted. "He's wearing a blue jacket," Leo continued, "and he has a scar on his forehead. He says he misses his dad. He says he's sorry." Tears welled up in Thomas's eyes, blurring his vision. He remembered that day vividly. It had been one of their last outings together before the accident. Ethan had scraped his knee falling off the jungle gym, and Thomas had promised to take him for ice cream afterward. They never made it to the parlor. Dr. Carter glanced at Thomas briefly, sensing the weight of the revelation. "Does Ethan say anything else?" she asked softly. Leo frowned, his expression shifting. He says I'm supposed to stay here. With you. He says you need me." The room fell silent except for the sound of Leo's steady breathing. When the session ended, Dr. Carter carefully brought him back to full consciousness, explaining that he had shared important memories during the trance. Though she refrained from offering explanations, her tone carried an unspoken acknowledgement. Whatever Leo was experiencing, it wasn't purely psychological. That evening, Thomas sat alone in the library, staring into the fire crackling in the hearth. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, but the picture they formed defied logic. It was as if Ethan had guided Leo to the cemetery that fateful day, ensuring their paths crossed. Perhaps the boy hadn't been abandoned by chance. Perhaps fate had orchestrated the entire sequence of events. As he mulled over these thoughts, a light breeze swept through the room, ruffling the pages of a nearby book. Thomas turned instinctively toward the window, half expecting to see someone standing there. Instead, he caught a fleeting glimpse of movement, a shadowy figure darting past the glass. For a brief second, he thought he saw Ethan's face smiling at him before vanishing completely. Heart hammering, Thomas stood frozen, unsure whether to laugh or cry. The rational part of his mind told him it was impossible, that spirits didn't exist. Yet everything pointed to the contrary, the uncanny resemblance between Leo and Ethan, the visions, the whispered messages. If he allowed himself to believe, even for a moment, that Ethan's presence lingered in the world, then maybe, just maybe, he hadn't lost his son entirely. With newfound resolve, Thomas vowed to protect Leo with everything he had. Whatever. Force had brought them together, it had done so for a reason. And until he understood that reason fully, he would cherish every moment they shared, as father and son, bound not only by love, but by something far greater than either of them could comprehend. The peace that had begun to settle over Thomas Harrington's estate was shattered one crisp morning, when the story of Leo broke into the public eye. It started innocently enough. A local journalist spotted Thomas and Leo leaving a high-end boutique, where Thomas had been buying clothes for the boy. The sight of a billionaire shopping with a scruffy-looking child raised eyebrows, and soon whispers spread like wildfire. By evening, the tabloids were ablaze with headlines. Billionaire. Adopt street kid, hero or hoax? At first, Thomas tried to ignore the media frenzy. He had always preferred privacy, avoiding interviews and steering clear of public attention. But as the days passed, the scrutiny intensified. Richard Langley, his business partner, appeared on a popular talk show, subtly questioning Thomas's motives. "It's unusual, isn't it?" Richard said, his tone dripping with faux concern. "A man who's lived alone for years suddenly takes in a random boy off the streets. One has to wonder what's really going on here." The insinuation stung. Thomas knew Richard well enough to recognize jealousy when he saw it. For years, Richard had been the closest thing Thomas had to a confidant. But their relationship had grown strained after Ethan's death. Now it seemed Richard resented the bond forming between Thomas and Leo, perhaps fearing it would shift the balance of power in their partnership. Still, the damage was done. The media latched onto Richard's comments, spinning wild theories about Thomas's intentions. Some painted him as a saintly figure driven by compassion. Others accused him of exploiting Leo for publicity or using him as a tax loophole. As the controversy swirled, social services stepped up their investigations. What had once been routine check-ins became intrusive interrogations. Social workers questioned Leo relentlessly, probing for signs of coercion or mistreatment. "Do you feel safe here?" they asked repeatedly. "Are you happy living with Mr. Harrington?" Each time, Leo answered honestly, his voice steady despite the pressure. "Yes, I'm safe, and yes, I'm happy." But the constant scrutiny wore on him. The cheerful boy who had started to blossom under Thomas's care began retreating into himself again, his smiles replaced by wary glances and quiet silences. Thomas, too, felt the strain. His lawyers worked tirelessly to navigate the legal complexities of adopting Leo, but every step forward seemed to be met with 2 steps back. Anonymous tips poured in, alleging everything from financial impropriety to emotional manipulation. Even the staff at the mansion grew uneasy, whispering among themselves about whether they should speak to reporters. Thomas found himself questioning his decision for the first time since bringing Leo home. Had he acted impulsively? Was he doing more harm than good? One particularly grueling day, after hours of meetings with his legal team, Thomas returned to the house exhausted. He found Leo sitting on the stairs, clutching his teddy bear and staring out the window. The boy looked smaller somehow, as though the weight of the world had settled onto his narrow shoulders. "What's wrong?" Thomas asked gently, sitting beside him. "They keep asking me questions," Leo said softly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "They think you're bad. They think you don't really want me here." Thomas's heart ached. "That's not true, Leo. You know that, right? I brought you here because I wanted to help you, because I care about you." Leo nodded, but doubt lingered in his expression. "Why do they hate us so much?" "They don't hate us," Thomas replied, though he wasn't entirely sure it was true. "Sometimes people misunderstand things. They see something different and assume the worst. But we'll get through this together, okay? We just have to keep proving them wrong." Leo didn't respond, but he leaned slightly closer to Thomas, seeking comfort without words. In that moment, Thomas realized how fragile their bond still was. Despite all the progress they'd made, it could be undone in an instant if he didn't fight harder to protect it. Determined to reclaim control of the narrative, Thomas decided to take a bold step. Against his lawyer's advice, he agreed to sit down for an exclusive interview with a reputable news outlet. The segment aired live, and millions tuned in to watch as Thomas spoke candidly about his reasons for adopting Leo. "When I found him in that cemetery, I saw myself in him," Thomas admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I saw a boy who needed someone to believe in him, just like my son did. Losing Ethan nearly destroyed me, but meeting Leo gave me a second chance, not just to help him, but to heal myself." The interview struck a chord with viewers. Calls and messages flooded in, many expressing support for Thomas and condemning those who had judged him unfairly. Even some of the skeptics softened their stance, acknowledging that perhaps there was more to the story than greed or opportunism. But while public opinion began to shift, the backlash wasn't over. A former neighbor of Leo's abusive uncle came forward with damning allegations, claiming that Leo had been involved in petty theft and vandalism before running away. The accusations reignited the debate, casting doubt on whether Leo truly deserved a fresh start, or if he was simply manipulating Thomas for his wealth. Thomas refused to let the lies stand. With the help of his private investigator, he tracked down witnesses who corroborated Leo's account of abuse and neglect. One elderly woman, tears streaming down her face, recounted how she had seen the uncle beating Leo and leaving him locked outside in freezing temperatures. "That poor child didn't deserve any of what happened to him," she told the cameras. "Anyone who says otherwise doesn't know the truth." The evidence was undeniable. Slowly but surely, the tide turned in their favor. Social services concluded their investigation, deeming Thomas fit to adopt Leo. The adoption process moved forward, bringing them one step closer to making their family official. Yet even as the external challenges subsided, internal struggles persisted. Leo continued to wrestle with the trauma of his past, compounded now by the stress of being thrust into the spotlight. Nightmares plagued him more frequently, and the strange occurrences in the house escalated. Lights flickered wildly, objects moved inexplicably, and the whispers grew louder, almost frantic. One night, during a particularly violent storm, Leo woke screaming, pointing toward the corner of his room. "He's here," the boy cried, trembling uncontrollably. "Ethan's here." Thomas rushed to his side, holding him close as thunder boomed overhead. For the first time, he allowed himself to fully entertain the possibility that Ethan's spirit was indeed present, that his son was watching over them, guiding them through the chaos. Whether it was real or imagined no longer mattered. What mattered was that Leo believed it, and that belief gave him strength. As dawn broke, casting golden light through the windows, Thomas made a silent promise to both boys, the one sleeping in his arms and the one who had passed on. No matter what obstacles lay ahead, he would fight for them. Together they would find a way to move forward, carrying the memory of Ethan with them as a beacon of hope in the darkest times. The adoption process finally reached its conclusion on a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the air feels alive with possibility. After months of legal battles, media scrutiny, and emotional turmoil, Thomas Harrington stood in a small courtroom, alongside Leo, their hands clasped tightly together. The judge's gavel came down with a decisive thud, sealing the papers that officially made Leo his son. For the first time in years, Thomas felt a sense of completeness, a hole in his heart patched over by the boy who had come into his life so unexpectedly. But while the legal hurdles were behind them, the journey was far from over. That evening, as they returned to the mansion, Thomas could see the weight of everything they'd endured etched onto Leo's face. The boy was quieter than usual, his wide eyes scanning the grand halls as though searching for answers to questions he couldn't voice. It wasn't just exhaustion or relief. It was something deeper, something neither of them fully understood yet. That night, the storm rolled in without warning. Dark clouds gathered overhead, blotting out the stars, and lightning split the sky, with jagged brilliance. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere grew heavy, charged with an energy that made Thomas uneasy. He sat in his study, nursing a glass of whiskey, when the lights began to flicker violently. At first, he dismissed it as the wind rattling the power lines, but then he heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, and unmistakably human, echoing through the hallway outside. Setting his glass down, Thomas rose to investigate. As he stepped into the corridor, the temperature dropped sharply, sending a shiver down his spine. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, and the faint sound of whispers filled the silence. His heart pounded as he followed the noise, each step feeling heavier than the last. Then he saw it. A figure standing at the end of the hall, partially obscured by shadows. For a moment, Thomas froze, his breath catching in his throat. The figure turned slowly, revealing a face that made his knees buckle. It was Ethan, his son, exactly as he remembered him. The scar above his eyebrow, the mischievous glint in his eye, the way he always tilted his head slightly when thinking about something. Tears welled up in Thomas's eyes as he stumbled forward, reaching out. "Ethan?" He choked, his voice trembling. "Is that really you?" The boy smiled softly, nodding. Then, before Thomas could take another step, Ethan pointed toward Leo's bedroom and vanished into thin air. Thomas didn't waste a second. Racing upstairs, he burst into Leo's room to find the boy sitting upright in bed, clutching his teddy bear and staring at the empty space beside him. "He was here again," Leo whispered, his voice shaking. He told me, thank you." "For what?" Thomas asked, kneeling beside the bed. Leo hesitated, tears streaming down his cheeks. "For letting me stay, for giving him a family again." The words hit Thomas like a punch to the gut. He pulled Leo into a tight embrace, holding him as both of them cried. In that moment, everything became clear. Ethan hadn't simply guided Leo to the cemetery that day. He had chosen him, to be part of their family, to fill the void left by his absence, to bring healing to a father who thought he'd never recover. Over the next few days, the supernatural occurrences ceased entirely, leaving behind an eerie calm. Thomas and Leo spoke openly about what they had experienced, piecing together the fragments of a story that defied explanation. They agreed that Ethan's presence had been real, not imagined, not a trick of grief, but a genuine connection between the living and the dead. And though they couldn't understand why or how it had happened, they accepted it as a gift. To honor Ethan's memory, they decided to hold a memorial service in the garden. On a sunny afternoon, surrounded by blooming flowers and the gentle rustle of leaves, Thomas and Leo placed a new headstone beside Ethan's grave. This one read, In loving memory of Ethan Harrington, a son, a brother, forever with us. Beneath it, they added a line that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Through love, we are never truly gone. As they stood there together, hand in hand, Thomas felt a profound sense of peace wash over him. For so long he had carried the burden of Ethan's death alone, convinced that moving on meant forgetting. But now he realized that love wasn't bound by time or space. It lived on in the bonds we formed, the memories we cherished, and the people we allowed into our hearts. Life at the estate settled into a new rhythm after that. Leo continued to thrive under Thomas's care, excelling in school and developing a passion for helping others. Inspired by his own experiences, he began volunteering at shelters for abandoned children, determined to make a difference in the lives of those who had no one else. Thomas supported him wholeheartedly, using his wealth and influence to fund programs aimed at providing safe havens and resources for kids in need. Their bond deepened with each passing day, built not only on shared joy but also on mutual understanding. Both of them carried scars from their pasts, Thomas from losing Ethan, and Leo from years of neglect and hardship, but together, they found strength in vulnerability. They laughed more, argued less, and learned to navigate the complexities of their relationship with patience and grace. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Leo broke the comfortable silence. "Do you think Ethan is happy now?" he asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. Thomas smiled, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I think he's happier than he's ever been, because he knows we're okay. We're together." Leo nodded, leaning into Thomas's side. "I miss him sometimes, but I feel like he's still here, you know? Like he's watching over us." "He is," Thomas replied firmly, "and he always will be." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Thomas felt a warmth spread through his chest, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light could shine through. Ethan had brought them together, bridging the gap between loss and hope, despair and redemption. And though his physical presence was gone, his spirit lived on in the laughter of a child, the embrace of a father, and the unbreakable bond of a family forged against all odds. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were thriving. Together. Years passed, and the Harrington estate transformed into a place of warmth and life, a stark contrast to the cold, lonely mansion it had once been. Leo grew from a shy, fragile boy into a confident young man, with dreams bigger than anyone could have imagined. His days were filled with schoolwork, volunteer projects, and laughter that echoed through the halls, chasing away any lingering shadows of the past. Thomas watched this transformation with pride, marveling at how much Leo reminded him of Ethan. Not just in appearance, but in spirit. The same kindness, curiosity, and resilience shone brightly in his eyes. Leo's journey wasn't without challenges. There were moments when memories of his childhood crept back, threatening to pull him under. But every time doubt or fear surfaced, he found solace in the bond he shared with Thomas. Their relationship had evolved into something deeper than father and son. It was a partnership built on trust, love, and mutual healing. Together, they faced whatever came their way, knowing they weren't alone. By the time Leo turned 18, he had already made a name for himself as an advocate for children living on the streets. Inspired by his own experiences, he founded a nonprofit organization called Safe Havens, which provided shelter, education, and counseling to kids who had nowhere else to turn. What started as a small initiative quickly gained traction, thanks in no small part to Thomas's financial backing and influence. The two worked side by side, attending fundraisers, meeting with policymakers, and visiting shelters across the country. One evening, after a particularly successful charity gala, Leo sat with Thomas in the study, sipping hot chocolate. "Do you remember when you first brought me here?" Leo asked, a nostalgic smile playing on his lips. Thomas chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "How could I forget? You looked like you'd seen a ghost, probably because you thought I was one." Leo laughed, shaking his head. No, I mean, do you think we ever would have guessed how far we'd come? Back then, I didn't even know if I'd make it through the night. And now look at you, Thomas said, his voice swelling with pride. You're changing lives, Leo. Not just your own, but hundreds of others. Ethan would be so proud of you. At the mention of Ethan's name, Leo's expression softened. He glanced toward the window, where the moonlight streamed in, casting silvery patterns on the floor. Do you still feel him around sometimes? Thomas nodded slowly. Every day, in the little things. The way the wind moves through the trees, the sound of laughter in the house, the quiet moments when everything feels right. I don't think he'll ever truly leave us. Leo smiled faintly, clutching his mug tighter. I feel him too. Especially when I'm working with the kids, it's like he's cheering me on, telling me I'm doing okay. You're doing more than okay, Thomas said firmly. You're extraordinary. As the years went by, Thomas began to step back from his business empire, entrusting its management to trusted colleagues while focusing on philanthropy alongside Leo. They traveled together, visiting communities in need and spreading awareness about the plight of abandoned children. Each trip brought them closer, not just to the people they helped, but to each other. For Thomas, these adventures reignited a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since before Ethan's death. And for Leo, they solidified the belief that he belonged to this family, to this mission, and to a future filled with endless possibilities. On the anniversary of Ethan's passing, they returned to the cemetery where their story had begun. The gravestone stood tall and clean, surrounded by fresh flowers and mementos left by friends and supporters. Standing hand in hand, Thomas and Leo bowed their heads in silent reflection. I wish he could see us now, Leo murmured, his voice thick with emotion. I wish he knew how much he means to both of us. He does, Thomas replied softly. He always has. A gentle breeze swept through the cemetery, rustling the leaves and carrying with it the faint scent of lilies. For a moment they swore they heard a child's laugh, the kind that used to fill their home, and exchanged knowing smiles. Ethan was there, watching over them, just as he always had been. In the years that followed, Leo pursued higher education, earning degrees in psychology and social work. His goal was clear: to dedicate his life to helping others heal, just as he had healed under Thomas's care. Meanwhile, Thomas continued to expand his philanthropic efforts, using his wealth to build schools, community centers, and safe houses worldwide. Their legacy became one of hope and resilience, a testament to the power of second chances and unconditional love. On Leo's graduation day, as he walked across the stage to receive his diploma, Thomas sat in the audience, tears streaming down. His face, he thought back to that rainy afternoon in the cemetery when fate had brought them together. If someone had told him then that this scruffy, broken little boy would grow into the remarkable man standing before him, he might not have believed it. But now, looking at Leo, his son, he knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that everything had happened for a reason. After the ceremony, they drove back to the estate, laughing and reminiscing about the journey that had led them here. As they pulled into the driveway, Leo turned to Thomas with a mischievous grin. You know, Dad, I think Ethan picked the perfect day to bring us together. It's almost poetic, isn't it? Thomas raised an eyebrow, feigning confusion. What do you mean? Well, Leo said, hopping out of the car. It's raining again. Sure enough, dark clouds rolled overhead, releasing a light drizzle that sparkled against the fading sunlight. They stood there for a moment, letting the rain soak their clothes before bursting into laughter. Life had thrown its share of storms their way, but they had weathered them all, together. That night, as they sat by the fireplace sharing stories, Thomas realized something profound. Ethan's presence wasn't confined to memories or supernatural encounters. It lived on in the bond they shared, in the lives they touched, and in the love that connected them across time and space. Leo wasn't just a reminder of what they had lost. He was proof that love never truly dies. It simply finds new ways to exist. And so, as the fire crackled and the rain tapped gently against the windows, Thomas and Leo embraced the future with open hearts. Whatever lay ahead, they faced it side by side, guided by the invisible hand of a boy who had once been their bridge between worlds.